let's go ahead and get started. So quick, I want to do some introductions before we jump into everything. So today we are talking about how to sell like a human with all the automation that's out there and all the fantastic tools that are available to sales and marketing and just about everybody. Sometimes we kind of forget the human aspect and the human element. And so that's the real focus of today's conversation. And I'm really excited by the guests we have and the panelists we have here. As we go through this webinar, before I get into introductions, if you have questions, please feel free to use them. We don't want this to turn into a boring lecture series where we're the only people having a conversation. We're certainly prepared, but if you have questions, feel free to send them over and we will ask them in a timely manner during the webinar. And of course, at the end, we'll also take some last-minute Q&A, but don't feel like you need to save your questions for the end. So to get started, I first want to introduce Russ Heddleston, who is the co-founder and CEO of DocSend. If you haven't used this tool, I use it religiously and daily, so there's your free plug, Russ. But it is a fantastic tool when it's used appropriately, like all the other tools that are out there. Next, we have Peter Kazanjy, and Pete, if I crushed your last name, I apologize.
Nailed it.
Oh, nice. Awesome. So he's a founding sales author and founder of TalentBin. So I think he has a unique perspective on that human element because he's talking to people all day long and has to help them be positioned the right way. Another big company I'm a fan of, Crunchbase, as I think many people in the startup world are. We have Greg McBeth, head of sales and customer success. And I'm really excited to hear how they are approaching this, is because they have a tremendous amount of quality data that I think we all need and all use on a regular basis. And it's just fun to sort of have them along with us on this conversation too. We also have Tim Yandel, who is from Boomtrain, who's the VP of Sales over there. Another fantastic service and tool. So, Tim, we look forward to your contributions. And last but not least, Alyson Welch, who is head of sales and business development. She was previously at Signal Labs. She was previously at, Alyson, where was it? We should all know it.
Akamai Technologies.
Akamai, yes, Akamai. And now she's sort of in her next stealth mode of where she's going to land next. But I'm really excited to have Alyson. I've worked with her and her sales teams in the past, so I know she brings a tremendous amount of knowledge to this conversation. So with that being said, I really want to jump right into it with everyone. And why are we having this conversation, right? Like, we've got a decent attendee list, and I'd love to hear from everybody who's on the panel. Or a couple of you, why do you guys think this is important? What do you, if you tell them I'm running late, why is this conversation so important, Russ? I know, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it off. I think if you ask anyone who's been in sales for a long time, people would say that it's always about the human connection, but some of the advances we've had recently allow us to do outreach at a huge volume, like you couldn't do before, and some of that personal touch can get lost in the process. And some people say that you can do sales. It's different. It's totally different now. You can send out 1,000 emails and it just everything happens. But you can't lose your authenticity if you're going to be good at sales. That's something that you just have to keep in the mix. And so now the question is, how do you have authenticity with a bit more efficiency?
Yeah, I think that's really great. And when you talk about being authentic, how do you, for those of you who've run a sales team, or all of you, and even on the talent side, what do you look for? We hear authenticity, right? It's a great word. We all want to be authentic. How do you coach people to be authentic, right? How do you coach your sales reps not to come across as hustlers, right? Not to say that they don't work hard, but we don't want the gamesmanship so much.
I can comment on that, and I think that one of the things that we oftentimes forget about is that the exercise of selling, especially we all have the benefit of being in the high technology solution space. So we're not selling commodity stuff like trying to sell somebody sand or concrete or what have you, where there's not really much of a competitive differentiation. And we're actually solving pains for organizations and for real people to help them be better at their jobs or make more money or get promoted or what have you. And so to the extent that our sales organizations can be empathetic and do a good job of aligning our solution that solves that problem with the pains that that individual has, and then be laser focused on that, that will help them be way more human, way more empathetic, and ultimately they'll do a better job of closing business, as opposed to like trying to shove us, like trying to make a sale to a mark and always be closing regardless of whether or not they have the pain in question.
Yeah, I want to ask a little follow-up to that too, and I agree with you about that authenticity and sort of the non-commoditized sale. One of the challenges I see working with companies is that even when you are the disruptive tool, right, like a Signal Labs or even a DocSend or places like Mastery where I was, oftentimes the prospect or the customer will try to commoditize you, not intentionally to make you lower your price, but because they're trying to go, well, aren't you just like so-and-so, right? And they will say, oh, you do this, but isn't that like what so-and-so does? So there's a chance of commoditization, not by intent and not from a negative perspective, but it just happens because as humans, we're always trying to figure out how this is relevant to something else we know, right? Look, we all know how to go and buy a Volkswagen and a BMW, right? We have a concept of that purchase. Well, if you're going to go buy a Tesla, it's a completely different frame of reference, right? It's done a little bit differently. So how do you guys work towards that? I don't know, Alyson, you've had a couple of sales teams.
Sure.
How do you help them focus on maintaining that authenticity or coaching them on that authenticity?
Sure. I mean, I think it goes back to you will always be challenged by, aren't you just like the next product or the next offering? And it's important to be able to distinguish why you are incrementally valuable or a better solution. However, you also have to take it back to their pain points. So I think one of the things that's really important when you're selling is make sure and coaching your teams, remember to always take it back to and really continue to drive to understand what their pain points are. They're trying to find the easy way out to commoditize you or to set you off guard. And the best salespeople and the best coaches can take their teams back into that mindset of, okay, I can explain my differentiators. I'm very comfortable with my differentiation. However, back to why we're trying to even solve this pain in the first place, back to your business problem. That's the point that I try and coach my teams on.
Right. And do you do that sort of in reviews or one-on-ones? How do you help them do that?
One-on-ones, or I'm riding along in the field ideally, or if you have the capacity to do that, or you're working with your managers too. Anytime you're going through forecasting and pipeline reviews, it's really, do we understand what the pain point is we're trying to solve for the specific client? Do we understand the timing and the nature of the need? And if they can't articulate that, it's a flag. It's okay, we need to spend a bit more time really understanding the business pains here and getting into a relationship with this customer or this prospect, if they're still a prospect.
Yeah, I think that's really great, and I have a little bit more of an even deeper follow-up, and maybe Pete, you might be able to answer this one, is how do you recognize authenticity, right? And maybe all of you have done this, right? And sometimes it happens in the interview process or through the sales process. What are the things that make someone really authentic in your own mind? Like, what are you looking for as a leader? Maybe start with Pete, but then maybe Tim, if you want to jump in too.
Well, it's funny, we were just talking about this with the guys at Growth Play who are presenting this conference that I'm at right now. I think the biggest things, like from an authenticity standpoint, it goes back to what Alyson was saying. Like, it all starts with the customer pain, and then because that's how your solution fits to it. So then how are you going to find people who can elicit that customer pain? And so one big characteristic there is like intellectual curiosity. You want to have people who want to tease out, like have ears, 2 ears and 1 mouth sort of thing, ask questions, actively listen. Also, people who show up prepared because they're going to do the proper research in order to understand what the pain points are, find out that information online, et cetera, et cetera. Those are some of the characteristics that you can use that will then set them up for success. And then oftentimes, having high coachability index as a rep is really important. So if you show up prepared and you are curious, but you're not delivering the objection, you're not handling the objection correctly, you're not delivering the value proposition exactly right, well, if Alyson is sitting there and she can coach on that, or she's listening to the call after the fact, and that rep can't consume that coaching, that's a problem. So looking for coachability is obviously very important.
Great, great.
Yeah, I mean, to dovetail off that point, I think that having an element of cross-training from your entire team, so listening and being involved in other people's phone calls in an environment that's conducive to that is a lot of ways that people can learn how other people are doing it. Another thing is get your sales folks really aware and almost to a T memorizing the case studies of your customers to understand the real value of it. So they don't feel like their only crux to tell them about your product is just a feature. It's a value proposition of what happened, and really falling in love with your customer base and seeing and being interested in who else out there that we can help. It's a shift that that people need to make mentally. But no matter what we're talking about today, like if the leader doesn't embody that, it doesn't really matter. You can say these things on a webinar or in a training session, but if you go do something that's completely different, it's all going to be for naught, right? So.
Yeah. And Greg, sort of for you, particularly with what you guys do, right? You offer data and information, and there's a lot of people in that space, and you guys have a real well-known targeted niche, in the startup space, in the SaaS world, and we all look at it. I think we've all sort of said, God forbid Crunchbase ever go away, which is great. Because that means you guys have something, but you are something that could be commoditized easily by the buyer, right? And I coach people to this all the time, which is oftentimes the people that you're trying to sell to aren't necessarily buying your product or service; they're buying you just as much as they are the product or service, right? How do you guys try and do that? How do you work towards that in a you're in data information, right? And I'm not trying to say that in a negative way of commoditization, but it could be perceived that way. So it seems like it's a challenge you have every day, I think is maybe the question I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the biggest challenge we have, to be really honest with you. I think ultimately, kind of coming back to Alyson's point around understanding the pain of the client, you have to understand really what it is that differentiates you as a solution relative to the market. So certainly there are a number of data providers out there. What are the things that clients are really looking for, though, from someone who's going to supply data to their or any solution to their business? And so we want to be able to craft that story around, what is it that Crunchbase as a company represents? What is it Crunchbase as a company stands for, or whatever the solution is, so that the customer can really internalize that differentiator and really sort of make that connection between what their pain point is and the solution that you have, and the difference between your solution and what else is out there on the market.
That's great. Thank you. And I do want to answer, we do have a question why Alyson can't be seen, because it's 2016 and technical difficulties still exist. So we apologize.
Sorry about that.
That you're
I don't have my makeup on yet.
Yeah, at these five handsome men. But thank you for asking the question, and I do want to encourage people, please ask us questions about authenticity. If you've had challenges around it, or you want to know how to coach someone out of to be more authentic, or whatever it is, feel free to chime in with questions from the audience. One of the things that's changed in the last few years, again, and we're speaking a little bit more on the tech side of sales, is that you're sort of given this first 30 to 45 minutes of a first discovery call, right? Your SDRs come in, they set up the call. Maybe some of your SDRs are actually doing the first qual call before a discovery call. And if you're not careful, you can't really just go in there and just start peppering this person with questions. They're not going to like it. But on the other hand, you do have to do discovery, right? So for me, one of the things that we talk about in our training is, always trying to make things very conversational, right? And not like an interview. But I'd be curious to know, maybe going back to Russ, how did your team go into an initial discovery call where you're still trying to earn their respect and create some rapport and maintain authenticity and being human, so that they do want to have that second call, right? Like, that's the goal of all first calls is, unless it's a one call close, just to get a second call.
Yeah, in that first call, you have to, as we've already gone over, have to differentiate yourself. There are a lot of document management systems out there. So for our sellers, it's all about storytelling and creating connection with them. and really helping them understand that you're there to help them. So even if they walk away from that call, just knowing a couple stories about another company that was in a similar bucket and what they did to further their business, it's all about making that connection and having them walk away feeling like they weren't just sold something, they had a nice conversation and they learned something. And that's the feeling that will make them take that second call. That's the feeling that's going to make them go back into their organization and be your champion.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was working with a company yesterday, and one of the things I made sure they understood was, do you know the difference between a use case and a case study, right? Your use cases are the pains you solve. The case studies are really relevant to that target vertical or that company. And so as a sales rep or an SDR, you need to know the difference so that you can know when to bring in the right case study, right? If you're selling to BMW, they may be interested in IBM's case study, but they're probably more interested in just the use case in general, because I think sometimes that will deter people.
I think
go ahead. Yeah.
One thing to go off of what Russ was saying there, one thing that I've found is really effective with discovery and kind of making discovery like a faster process, or at least it's kind of like earning you more of a right to ask more questions, is and it relates to like the preparation thing I was saying earlier. Like if a rep is able to do good pre-call planning, and so one of the things we would do is have 15 minutes of time scheduled before a demo, so that when the SDR creates the demo object or the calendar invite, they would put 15 minutes on the rep's calendar ahead of time to ensure that they had adequate time to do pre-call planning. So that could be like, going onto the prospect's website and answering questions that like for yourself, or going on to Crunchbase and finding out how much funding they have, so you don't have to ask them that.
Yeah.
So doing the homework, doing pre-discovery by doing pre-call preparation, such that you can foreshorten the discovery or spend more time on like the nitty-gritty of stuff, makes you look like a rock star and compresses the time component of it.
Yeah. That's really great. I think I coach people too, is that if you can learn it from their website or on their LinkedIn profile, then you shouldn't need to ask that question in the conversation.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you come in prepared as a sales rep, right? At the basic level, or Crunchbase or those places. We spoke about a word, storytelling, that I want to dig into, but it sort of matches a specific question coming from Kate. And so I'll sort of let whoever wants to answer it, but her question was, how do you coach that more technical or academic seller on their soft consultative selling skills, right? Which sort of dovetails really nicely into this concept of, well, how do you teach people to be better storytellers? So, how have any of you taken that on?
I think there's...
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
We can arm wrestle on this webcam thing, right? I think that... I think it's yeah. Storytelling is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is improv skills. Like, I can't even say the word, so apparently I need coaching. And I think that to tell a compelling story, you have to understand the value and really the use case, of course, of the customer, but understand what problems it's solving in a very deep level. The improv area of it comes into a way that you can rehearse and practice everything, but if you don't practice the art of improv and the ability to listen and make the person you're talking to look good and feel comfortable, which is the whole essence of improvisation, then you're kind of losing an opportunity to be authentic. So, I mean, more importantly than anything else, I think it's human nature to say, like, if other people make that person feel good, regardless of what you're selling or talking about, you win that conversation because you're providing value to the person you're speaking with. So, Greg, you can continue, or if there's something else you want to say on that. Sorry to interrupt.
That's a great point. I'll kind of shed a little light on my past. I mean, I was a former engineer, so I really started out as probably more of an academic salesperson, and I had a hard time sort of making that connection very early on in my sales career. And so one of the things that I started to do, because it was more of my comfort zone, was take a little bit more of a scientific approach to how do we interweave storytelling into the sales process. So you look at what are the common threads amongst the clients that you're trying to serve, and then I would go back and I would start writing out different stories that I could remember from my career or things that I could sort of think would relate to somebody, and then I would go test them out like any other experiment. They would see, what did I make someone laugh? Did I really sort of get them more engaged at a point where they weren't? And over time, we got more comfortable with that process, and then it became a lot more natural, but it was not an early thing up front, and frankly, it took months, maybe years to get to a point where I really felt comfortable independent of that.
I think it goes to just real practice, just like any athlete, right? Athletes don't, once they hit the big times, stop practicing. They're continuously honing their skills and practicing in new ways that they didn't know were possible. So I think sales athletes are the same, and it's definitely an art. It's not something that everyone has the capacity for, but you can develop it. And I think the improv concept, and I see it more and more where sales teams are using improv classes or going to sessions like that or hiring improv to come in and relax the conversation, make it more natural, make it a conversation, not just, I have this 30 minutes with you and I need to do X, Y, Z. That's not the point.
I would agree. I see that a lot too. There is a great book on about sales and storytelling, and it talks about, without getting too negative, but it talks about the concept of what hostage negotiators have to do, where they literally have to come in and establish rapport quickly. They've got 20 to 30 minutes for discovery to try and solve this problem. Like that's a real sales job. Like what we do, nothing compared to that. But again,
Rich, I wanted to add something on the practice. I think one of the things that it's under, not to harp on preparation, but kind of keying off of what Alyson said, I think a lot of the times folks will do, they'll do some practice in onboarding when you're onboarding a new SDR, you're onboarding a new AE or what have you, but oftentimes that isn't done as intentionally as when you take an SDR to an AE or on an ongoing basis. And I love the sports metaphor because you don't stop running drills throughout. You always practice when you're a football player or a baseball player or what have you. And for whatever reason, we seem to think that that's something that is scary or bad or what have you. When you're giving a mock demo to somebody and you stop and say, okay, that actually was a problem. That objection was handled wrong, or you missed these obvious things that you asked me in discovery that could have been pulled off of the website or what have you. And so calendaring that and actually committing time to it is something that can really help. The second thing is also having lots of good materials such that reps know that they have at least the framework for success, whether it's a script or battle cards or what have you, because once they have those nailed, having that nailed will then give them the confidence to be able to do improv and extemporize. So being confident that you have everything nailed gives you the support to improv more.
Yeah, and a couple people are asking this question. So the title of that book is actually called "What Do Great Salespeople Do?" So it is all about storytelling and teaches you the art of storytelling, whether it's battle cards or picking your theme, and it literally makes you take different color index cards to conceptualize your stories so that you know which pieces are missing. So a couple of people have asked that, so I wanted to pass that information along. When we were prepping for this call with everyone, one of the things we talked about with storytelling was sort of the skills development, right? And we talked a little bit about sort of, defining communication as being bidirectional, making sure you have your first step and highlighting sort of 3 stories at a high level that you want someone to walk away with. Is there something anyone would like to add to that concept? I feel like we've touched on it a little bit in this conversation, but I wanted to, from our prep call, we seem to have a nice conversation around that and see if there was something I want to make sure we hit all of that.
Yeah, the one point that we didn't talk about with the storytelling is it's really important to also be an active listener, even more so than you realize. So you've got your stories down, especially if you're new to the product or new to the space. You're going to be storytelling on, accelerated mode of getting your message across or getting your pitch in. and you're going to, it's natural to forget to let them have a chance to share, or talk, or react. And I think that bidirectional element, almost the active listening, is more important than get the story across, of course, make your point, differentiate your value proposition, but do participate in the active listening piece.
Yeah, and to bring it back to the improvising point from Alyson earlier, we have a big list of all the stories for DocSend and customers and what they've done with it and why they've loved it. And you have to match the right story to the right scenario. And it's really exciting if you're actively listening and you piece together like, oh, there's this perfect story to drive it home with this person because they're just like this other thing. It's a really fun moment to hear, and then you get that feedback from them. They'll interrupt you. They'll want to jump in. They'll want to talk about it. And so if it all can come together, and it's a cool thing to see.
I also think, and we didn't mention this, but I'll mention it too, is that getting customer success to help you tell those stories, right? Customer success has the best stories. They do. They understand, what the person was trying to do when they first started the service and what they've done 6 months later, which was usually never what they intended to do in the first place, right? Like they know those stories. So making sure you engage your customer success team with your sales team and your SDR team and your marketing team to really unpack those stories, I think is super critical. Something I've seen where I've really seen people get successful with the storytelling is make sure you know the stories. Because as sales leaders, we'll go, great, here's our 5 stories, memorize them. And 5 months later, we're still telling the same stories. I can assure you there are new stories. There are better stories. There are more interesting stories. So really encapsulate customer success into this part. And I think that will really, really beneficial for everyone.
One thing that we're trying to build here, it's by no means built, is a forum to have customer success as well as sales do like a 30-second to a minute video as to what was a win story. And it's sometimes these case studies, they take a long time to develop because you need the publicly facing, all these things that kind of go into bottlenecking. That what you're talking about, Richard, is like that close to the pulse of really what's happening. And so these short form videos prompt customer success and sales and anyone else in the company that has a good story to tell to actually go back to what Alyson was talking about, was practicing pitching. Like you can do anything in front of a video and know it's going to be played on one of the TVs multiple times a day. You're going to prep on it. You're going to practice. So I think everyone in the company is in sales in some capacity. So if you can, extend the olive branch for the rest of the company to realize that they're impacting that, let alone just not building a product that sales sells, but building a cohesive culture that stands behind whatever you sell. That's an extension of that as well.
One of the things we would do at TalentBin is we would spiff it. So at TalentBin, we sold recruiting software. Before we were bought by Monster Worldwide, obviously it was really important to have success stories of individual clients who had quickly hired the type of talent that they were looking to hire using our tooling. So we had our customer success folks focused on that KPI from day one, and then moreover, when they knew that KPI had been achieved and the kind of time to success there, they would actually persist that off as a validated hire report in the CRM, and they would actually get spiffed on that such that we could take that information and go use it in the selling process, because it just helps like focus the mind. So even if it's only like $50 Amazon gift card or whatever, now you're focusing minds on there, and like lo and behold, all of a sudden now you have 100 different customer success stories and you're stoked.
That's cool. So I want to back up just a little bit. We had a question come in from the group as we're doing discovery and helping you set up the storytelling pieces. Open-ended questions. We hear this, we've been hearing it for years. Better ask open-ended questions. You better ask open-ended questions. And from what I can tell, we're probably no better at it now than we were 15 years ago. Unless you do some heavy training on it. Do you guys consciously concentrate on that with your sales teams? And if so, how do you do that?
I think great question. Go ahead. I'll jump in after.
Okay. My point was really short. I mean, I think that if you hire curious people and they care about the answer, they're going to naturally ask open questions. So that was my main point. Of course, Alyson, you can slam dunk it.
Yeah, I very much in agreement, and I think the silence is that we're wondering how we do it, because it's a great point. I think that if you again, it goes back to really understanding the business pain. So if the sales rep can't get, or they're probably not asking open-ended questions, and so just giving them the opportunity to have, if there's maybe a card that they reference that has the way to start a conversation with open-ended questions, having teasers around your desk area, or if you're out in the field, always bringing someone. I think it's great to team up on calls and bring a peer with you, or if you're with your sales engineer, and play off of one another and make sure you're stoking the conversation, and that if you're not, that somebody else is in the room to help you get it back on track.
I think the only thing to be careful about there, I've talked to sales reps who have said that their managers will tell them to never ask a question that's not open-ended. And I think that if you have that black and white, I think it creates some challenges. And I kind of like to think of it as, the open-ended question is sort of what gets you going in the general direction, right? If you're going to take a road trip, you need to know which highway to go down. But you're still going to have to sort of make incremental adjustments along the way to stay in the lane or to take the right exit. And so I think of, the open-ended question is what's going to get me going, what's going to get the conversation going in that general direction, and then the yes or no or sort of quick answer questions are going to be ones that sort of help make sure that you're staying down that right path.
Yeah, that's great. That's really solid advice, and I agree that you kind of need like this quiver of arrows, right? And some of them are going to be open-ended questions to help you move the dialogue along. Other times, though, you do need to ask a closed-ended question, right? You do need to confirm, with a yes or no around something. And that doesn't mean, I think people will often go, I'm not talking about so if I can show you a solution that meets your problems, would you buy that today? Like, that's not the kind of closed-ended question I'm talking about. But I am, I think you can say things like, hey, I just want to recap what you said. Did I get this right? And that sort of shows that you're being empathetic, that you're letting them know that you are listening. But it can be a yes or no question, because then you can figure out if you've got it right or not, and if not, then you can keep unpacking a little bit more. Another question coming in from the audience. So there's a little bit of a wind up, so give me a second. It says, in New Sales, Simplified, Mike Weinberg discusses having an internal story that the whole sales team knows and all have in the back of their minds as a go-to to try and tell the story externally on the sales pitch. Have any of you ever had this sort of, how important it is to have that internal company story as the backbone that you are focusing on, right? And that could be, maybe that's alluding to your value proposition or sort of the beginning of where you started. Have you guys, in your own teams, do you have that sort of backbone story that everybody knows in the back of their head about what you're doing?
I think you're touching on like mission statement or vision. Maybe that's a bigger thing from a company objective. I think departmentally, you should stem off of whatever the vision of the company is and stand for something that supports that. So I think having one company statement and mission that everyone kind of tattoos to their arm and says 5 times a day before walking out of the elevator, isn't really the point, or putting it on the wall. I think that having certain orgs stand for something different, like what does the sales org stand for at Boomtrain? What do we want to accomplish together, and what is the purpose and the vision for the team? And that's internal and external, right? So you're solving customer problems, but people are people. So why are they working here on a daily basis? And it has to be more than just the paycheck. So advertising that internally, and then don't be afraid of saying that externally as well, as people have things that they're working on here, and why they're here. It's not just about the customer, but that is an extension of it.
Yep.
Richard, one quick addition there. I would just say it also varies based on the size of the company. So, larger companies, they're going to have the big mission statements and the big BHAG for the year that you're chasing after, and it's going to be clear to the street and everybody. Smaller companies may not be able to convey in that annual time frame. It may be, or 3-year plan, it may be a quarterly goal, and that's actually great too. So I think also, sales teams need to understand that it depends on the size of the company, how much is articulated and how big the vision really is, and then ensure that you're all aligned and marching to whatever time frame is reasonable for the size of the company.
Yeah, I'm gonna be a little controversial and sort of disagree on the mission statement, because most of the time, unless you're a big company, small companies don't even know how to write a mission statement.
Yeah.
With great intent. They have great intent to write one, but they aren't skilled or practice at it. And so for me, look, I bet everybody's mission statement includes, we're passionate about solving this challenge. We value our people more than anything in the world. We want to go green and support the human earth, right? So that's, at the big level, that's the stuff we're talking, when I hear mission statement, that's what I think. But I think, Alyson, to your point, sort of departmentally, it's, why are we here as a passion at your organization, right? Why are people passionate about whatever tool it is that's that cutting edge or that unique? Like, why are you passionate about DocSend, right? Why are people passionate about talent search or Crunchbase, right? So I think that to me is a really important piece. And do they have the story of that passion? And then do they have that own passion themselves?
Even if you don't have like a mission statement, I was hanging out with Steve Johnson, who used to be the head of sales at Hootsuite this morning, and he was talking about, there's this, I forget who wrote the book, Noble Purpose, right? Noble Purpose selling, where essentially, like, if you have a concept of what this noble purpose is that you're trying to achieve, it actually is very helpful to reps insofar, especially junior reps, insofar as rather than deploying a challenger sale where you're kind of impeaching the way that a current organization is doing their hiring, or they're doing their document management, or they're doing their prospecting in the case of like Crunchbase, and then kind of saying like, oh, you're doing it wrong, you can do it better this other way. You kind of flip it around. And so by having this, even just like a kind of conception of what your noble purpose is, which is kind of related to a mission, you can say, we think that the promised land is over here. We're really pumped up about it, and this is why we want to lead you in that direction. So if you have like 24 or 25-year-old reps who are trying to sell into, maybe more senior folks, oftentimes it can be challenging for them to like impeach the kind of business process as usual. So if you flip it around and say like, okay, we've kind of been to the mountain and seen this thing, we want to also show you that as well. It's like a challenger sale in reverse without that kind of negative connotation.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah. One thing that happens for us is people just sometimes buy emotionally, and you have to pitch them on the version of the future and why, like, you understand that vision of the future and why your product would make sense there. So I think, Tim, for Boomtrain, that especially comes up for marketers. Like, it's not necessarily about specific features at first. It's just it's kind of a mission, but this is a version of the future, and this is why it would be better if you did this sort of thing. And being able to talk at that high level gets people on board emotionally, and then they follow up with the details.
Yeah, and respectfully, everybody buys on emotion. It's something we teach all the time. Whenever we don't buy on emotion, or we buy on the wrong emotion, we end up having cognitive dissonance, and everybody's got a bunch of clothes in their closet that they bought that way that they've never worn before. So that's how I know it's true. Same thing happens with software. How many things are in your stack that never get touched? I want to shift a little bit on this one. We spent a lot of time about being authentic, and we talked early in the call about authenticity as well as being efficient, right? How do you focus, again, you're sort of on that first discovery call, and helping to focus on making the most out of that call, both authentically and efficiently, right? How do you get through that call to make sure that on the first call you're able to cover those 2 or 3 things that you think you need that are going to help set the second call? Has anybody sort of looked at it from that efficiency perspective on the panel?
I think that kind of hinges on having a script, right? And understanding, like, you only have a certain amount of time, prioritizing the things that you can do. If you have a simple product, like at TalentBin, we didn't have discovery and kind of demo split. It was more kind of like rolling, because the product wasn't like rocket science. It wasn't like Boomtrain. It wasn't AI. But just like paying attention to cadencing and the amount of time that you have and the things that need to go first, and such that you have the opportunity. So you're not trying to like shove 30 slides down somebody's throat. But if you them do have more time, or if they want to hear more, you have that content available, but it doesn't feel like a death march. And so that just comes back to what Alyson was saying. It's just like practice, right? Having the materials planned out and then drilling on it such that folks can do that.
I think it really comes down to like I think there is the moment of like being client-centric for sure, but I think that as the first thing that salespeople need to work on is it worth my time pursuing this, right? And I think yes, you have to understand the idea of a sales call, right? Is to create interest, but once you establish, you just assume that that everyone's interested, and then the latter half of the discovery call is really, can you tell me why we should spend time? Is this really going to solve a pain point that's important to you? As opposed to, let me tell you why we're so special, or tell me what we do as a company that will fix everyone's pain point. The simple truth of the matter is, like, we don't solve everyone's pain point, and it might not be a priority for you if we do solve everyone's pain point, right? So having that kind of that criteria of efficiency being like, do we want to use more of your time as a salesperson, have that position of strength, sales mentality, on whether or not this is something that you want to continue through the process, is a subtle but very, very important thing to embody as a sales leader to teach.
I love that. That's one of my favorite things to remind salespeople, is that your time is just as important as your customer's time and or prospect's time. And it's okay to recognize that this may not be a mutual conversation, mutually beneficial conversation, and let's agree to take it up at a time when it is. That's empowering for people.
Yeah, we did that. We did that with Alyson's team, teaching them in the first 3 minutes how to just say, hey, look, I know you're evaluating us. Please do. And likewise, we want to evaluate you a little bit too and make sure we're the right solution. And if it's not, that's okay. And when you say that to somebody in the beginning of a first discovery call, the pressure valve just releases and the prospect goes, oh, wow, I can tell you no? And be like, yeah, of course. Just like I'm going to tell you no if I don't think I can help you. I don't need to chase you for no reason. And as Alyson said, it's very empowering when that happens. Back to the efficiency piece, I want to sort of come back to what Greg said, and I think this might be a piece, is that if going into your first call or second call, whatever that call is, what 2 or 3 things you need to get them to, for lack of a better word, say yes to or agree to in terms of pain and resolution. Like as Greg said, he sort of sat down and wrote down, these are the things we do, and here are the pain solutions. If you know that and do that prep, as Pete's been talking about, before you go into the call, you can steer that conversation by being both authentic and efficient. If you go in willy-nilly, let's just see what happens, well, you're going to get those kinds of answers. And people are going to get the traditional happy ears of salespeople thinking they've had a great call when in fact they didn't do anything. But I think Greg's approach to that really speaks to that question. Let me see. I want to make sure there's a couple of more questions are coming. I just want to get there, make sure we've got them all. Everybody seems to like that book. So here's a question. So should I be giving more auto schedules to underperforming BDRs and SDR reps, right? Should I be making things, in that process, if they're underperforming, is authenticity going to help? Because authenticity could slow down the process, if I understand the question. And I'll sort of I have an opinion, but I'll let the group answer on that one.
What did you, an auto schedule? I'm not sure.
So you can use, a sales loft cadence tool or a tout app, or, how do you use those things to maintain authenticity and efficiency and effectiveneness, right? And that might be a better question to take offline. So Tessa, feel free to ping me.
It's a great. I know the sales loft guys, the outreach guys, and one of the things that's actually really important there is, in addition to paying attention to like an activity KPI, which is obviously important. Sales is a high activity enterprise. You also want to tie a quality KPI to it as well. So if you have activity going through the roof, but at the same time the quality is declining, like response rates or open rates or what have you, obviously that's a problem. So if you have somebody who has low response rates, and you're going to just give them more firepower, that's going to be problematic because they're just going to burn through your entire account list, right? And conveniently, most of these solutions end up having these metrics that are sitting there. So just making sure that as a manager or your sales operations person is helping you eyeball that such that you don't have that issue.
Yeah, I call that accelerating the suck. If you're not careful, you will accelerate the suck.
Don't accelerate the suck, bro.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so here's another piece, right, about being human, right? There are inside sales and there are outside sales, right? Each have their own unique skill set and value. How do you maintain authenticity if you're running an inside sales team, teaching those reps to be authentic versus an outside sales team where they are going to get, you know, verbal cues, and, you know, we're all sitting here very stoically and making sure we're not sending over, you know, bad things, and we're not typing on stuff and pulling up our phone. What are the things you guys have worked with or worked towards based on your experience with inside sales and outside salespeople on maintaining humanity through the sales process?
I think that you mentioned it, right? So I think that inside sales, it's somewhat limiting in what you can you discover about someone, whoever you're talking to. It could be a prospect, could be an interview, and then once you teach that tonality is important, words that you use are important, but I would say tone is probably more important than the words you use. And then when the outside sales comes into it, it starts to expose you into a lot of other areas, and those social cues that you're talking about, body language is the main thing that you look at, eye contact, all these little things that you have to pay attention to. So I think that having the ability to not just do face-to-face meetings if it's important. If it's a big room of people, you should never go by yourself. You should always have a tag partner to read the room and respond. There are some times that you're pitching a solution and you think you're doing a great job, but the person to your right is realizing that everyone is checking their cell phone and no one's interested, and you are completely losing your audience by talking about this algorithm that you think is so awesome. And that's part of it, right? So to make sure that regardless of what training you can get, like, people can be better at it, but like, I don't think anyone's ever going to be perfect at doing outside sales. You just don't always know the audience, and you don't have eyes in the back of your head, right? So I think that doing a teamwork approach is probably the best way to do it for outside sales.
I think on the oh, go ahead.
Go
Alyson.
ahead, Pete. Okay. You can't see me.
No. I wanted you to talk about the active listening because you talked about it earlier. Like, that's a great answer. So I was hoping you would expand on that.
So I was thinking about active listening, but I was also thinking about inside sales now isn't just the phone. It's SMS. It's communicating and learning about people through social, and trying to drive emotional behavior and purchase power through so many different channels. So to me, the inside sales rep, it's really an important skill to hone and be aware of the multi-channel capabilities that are out there. When you're in person, you have the ability to walk the halls with the person, see what the office looks like, feel out what they're into just based on what they, physical appearance and all that. You have that benefit. Over the phone, you have to, or over digital, you have to, leverage so many different active measurements, listening included, but other tonalities that come through via text and whatnot. So really paying attention to those, not over analyzing, not getting stuck because you're frozen at interpreting something, but trying to get back into the conversation and really drive again back to understanding where is this coming from, what are the pains, what are the pressures that they're under, from an inside perspective. That it can be paralyzing, but it can also be really, you have so many different mechanisms to leverage to try and get connected to that person or that buyer.
Kind of two things there. One, on doing a sales presentation over the phone is such a different way of communicating with somebody than when you talk face to face, that it just really has to be drilled. Like, normally in a common conversation, you don't have as much repetition because you feel like kind of a clown repeating things, right? Or constantly checking for comprehension and actively listening, almost to like laughable level, but that's what you have to do in order to communicate well across the phone. So that's the first thing is you have to change how you roll that way. The second thing is you're missing out on all these other cues like Tim and Alyson were talking about that you get outside. The good news is that now with digital you can kind of see some of those cues. So like we used to use ClearSlide at TalentBin, so you could actually tell if somebody was, actually looking at the screen versus checked out on their other tab, like doing email or what have you. And this extends to all the way to like, after the call, when you send them, like, DocSend is really helpful for this. You send them your collateral, your sales deck, or whatever after the fact, and now you kind of have that instrumentation to see, is somebody stoked on what you're doing, based on their activity there as well. So it's almost kind of like bringing the offline online a little bit, but it's still, has anyone done like video stuff like this? Because that just seems like an uncharted territory or like undiscovered country, and it just feels that like having face-to-face interaction with a prospect could really be helpful, but I haven't seen any tooling that actually like supports that.
I think GoToMeeting does a little bit of it, but there's a couple of tools that could do some of it.
Yeah.
And our customer success team will just make videos of them talking about the answer with the screen share and their faces in there, and they'll send it off to people. And they've had huge success with that. Like people, it's like, wow, a personalized answer just for me. And we'll do that in trials as well. If people have questions during the trial, or we want to have the oomph of being there in the room, but they're in Chicago or something, we'll just record ourselves and send that to them.
It's like an asynchronous like inside-outside sale.
Yeah.
So we're kind of getting close to the end. We've got a couple more minutes, but I want to sort of go back over a couple of things, and I'm going to ask the spotlight question, which is, we've talked about authenticity, we've talked about preparation, we've talked about storytelling, and in today's world of better, faster, cheaper, faster and cheaper seems to take over as opposed to better. So my question for the group is, how often do you actually have your reps role-playing, practicing, knowing your stories, right? Outside of the first 2 weeks of training, how are you really managing that on a day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out way? How do you really improve those skills?
We don't just do stories, but we do a weekly, I ask our reps to do some sort of like weekly development activity that helps sort of hone a specific skill about having a better conversation or dialogue with a client. So sometimes that might be a storytelling question, sometimes it could be how to structure an email or how to leave a more effective voicemail or things like that, but they typically all kind of come back to this question about having a more natural and engaging dialogue.
Yeah.
Great. Anyone else?
At TalentBin, I'm a big fan of like saying if you want something to happen, you got to put it on the calendar for folks, right? You got to systematize it. So we'd have Wednesday afternoons, pipeline reviews. Friday afternoon, when everyone's kind of like burnt out and destroyed anyway, we would do kind of development time. So we had 2 hours at the end of the day where AEs would either they would have an SDR buddy that they were doing professional development with. And so nothing is better than teaching to help you learn a topic or cement your understanding of the topic. So if you have an AE who's helping an SDR get better at her craft, in the process, that AE is also getting better at his craft. So just making sure that it's actually on the calendar in a cadence fashion. Maybe it doesn't have to be once a week. Maybe it's every other week or what have you. It doesn't have to be 2 hours. Maybe it's 1 hour. But just, like if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to happen. So at least putting it there will make it such that it's more likely to happen.
Right.
Yeah, we do weekly training as well, and it's not always pitch practice. I mean, I think if you do something too much, it starts to lose its effectiveness, right? So. But yeah, once a month I think is a good, for fully ramped reps is a good, probably the most aggressive as you want to do it. For any like new pitch deck or new product offering, we can do a meeting 1 week, and then the meeting afterwards would be, hey, let's practice pitching it. Let's see how it's resonating on the phone. What have people learned? It's one thing to write up a perfect presentation in a pitch, and I think we've all done that, where it's like, this is gonna be awesome, and then you just like actually. Once you talk to someone, you're like, oh, wait, no, this is not so good. So,
I think too, practicing where you're stuck. and not just practicing the the wins or sharing the wins with the team. We do a lot of, and I do these in bi-weekly sessions with stand-ups where, someone who is stuck on an opportunity will get up and talk about where he's stuck and how he has approached the prospect, and the team will share ideas or challenge the approach.
Yeah.
And I was also writing down just a teaming of pairing off. Like, I like that idea of the SDR and the rep pairing together. Which one of you said that? I thought that was a good one. And then I don't think we do it enough informally. So just anytime you're out on the road or in meetings or following up in one-on-ones, giving that coaching about authenticity and efficiency. Because the faster, better, cheaper stuff will happen if you're authentic and efficient with your approach. You'll get better, and it'll just start naturally allowing you to accelerate or create velocity around your sales process.
That's great. So I want to take a quick minute and just sort of let everybody know that next week on July 28th, we're going to be doing another webinar on the power couple. How do you get sales and marketing to walk down the aisle together and fall in love? So that'll be one that's coming up. And then in August 2nd, we're having one on the secret sauce to account-based sales, marketing, and sales. So if anybody listening is interested in those, you can find out more on the Sales Hacker website. Before we go, I do want to give everybody an opportunity first to say thank you to the audience, but please, maybe Russ, we'll start with you. Tell everybody what DocSend does so they know. Let's try not to be overly pitchy, but definitely, let's give people information about how you can be supportive to their sales efforts.
Yeah, I'll do a real quick overview. It's a document management and screen sharing solution for sales and marketing teams. One cool thing is the tracking that we have on what you send. So we were talking earlier about digital body language. You can actually see what's happening and who's reading stuff after you have that great meeting, and that information really helps with tailored follow-up.
Digital body language, I like that. That's a new buzzword.
Good, Russ.
6 months to use it. Greg, how about you guys? We know who Crunchbase is, but tell us more.
Sorry, I was mute. Most people think of Crunchbase as crunchbase.com and going up and looking at a particular record or getting the weekly email. But what we've recently started to do is provide kind of broader access to the data set so that people can ingest it into a spreadsheet, a CRM, or whatever they're sort of looking to, or even sometimes into their own product platform to help kind of make more effective decisions for themselves or for their customers. So that's something we've recently opened access to our data for. So if people are interested, let me know.
Pete, go for it.
Oh, I don't have a company. I founded TalentBin. I sold it to Monster 2 years ago. I wrote a book on sales for founders called Founding Sales. It's essentially the book that I wish that I had when I was a founder, didn't know anything about enterprise sales and proceeded to make terrible mistakes. You can follow that at Founding Sales on Twitter. I also run a large sales operations, sales leadership meetup called the Modern Sales Salon that has meetings in San Francisco. So,
Great.
But yeah, I have nothing to pitch.
That's all right. Tim, tell us about you guys.
So we are a machine learning AI company. We focus on making personalized recommendations for marketers. So making your emails not be spammy and actually sent to you and something you'd actually like to read. So we don't really sell to salespeople, but we are hiring salespeople. So anyone that's in San Francisco looking for something, you could be this guy right here, like that guy right there.
It was clearly a cool manager.
Yeah, Alyson, can you shed any light on your new stealth project, or is it still?
Yeah, no, I'll come back to you on the next one, Richard, and I promise to show up this time with a camera that's working. Sorry about that. Thanks everyone for your patience.
Super stealthy, Alyson.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to show the whiteboards in the background.
It's hilarious. I wish.
Tim, isn't that your artificial intelligence? Alyson's just our AI, and that's
Yeah, right? Pretty good.
Yeah,
right?
actually everything behind me is fake, right?
Right. Well, thank you again, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for joining us, and what I think is been a very fun and enlightening conversation. I hope other people found it useful. Someone did ask, yes, it is going to be recorded and be available for your own viewing pleasure at whenever you have more time. So, but thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Cool. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks.